Hello everybody, welcome back to Reddit Aliens. I'm John, and we've got a 1-hour video coming your way. So kick back and relax with today's topic. What is the scariest camping experience you've ever had? Not safe for work. Please remember to like, share, and subscribe. Went camping in deep Appalachia in a tent. Woke up to a weird feeling that I was laying on something, then I felt it move. A snake had made its way under my tent, and I think it was trying to get warm as it stopped moving right under where my back was. After moving a bit, it finally went on its merry way. I'll never forget how it felt moving underneath me. I was camping once in the UP in Michigan, in a pretty secluded spot with distinct individual campsites. It was in the fall, so dead leaves were all over the ground. When we were settling into sleep, we started to hear these slow, consistent footsteps on the leaves. They'd walk around the campsite, circle our tent, just walk all around without any clear goal and without stopping. Obviously, we assumed it was some kind of animal, but when we rushed out with the light, there was nothing. I mean, no sound, no trace of anything. Once we were back in the tent, these footsteps immediately started up again, and they didn't come from far away. They started up right next to our tent. We repeated the whole rigmarole probably 3 more times because of how distinct and close and creepy the footsteps were, and we never caught even a glimpse of what was walking around. The next morning, we were sitting by the fire and started hearing the steps again, only to look down and realize it was the sound of multiple small frogs hopping around the campsite. 10 years ago, I went camping for a weekend. Went out hiking the morning of the second day and pretty soon found ourselves off trail on a pretty steep incline along the Monashee River. We were about 100 feet up the incline. Suddenly, one of my friends lost his footing and started to slide. On the way down, he took out my other friend, and I watched them hit every rock and tree on the way down to the rapids. I climbed down to find my one friend dead on the side of the river and the other taken away by the river. His body was found 2 weeks later, 2 kilometers from where they fell in. His body, or whatever is left of it, is still in the river, because when search and rescue tried to remove it from the log jam it was stuck in, the boulders on the riverbank came loose and collapsed on top of his corpse. This was a very abbreviated version of the story, but overall, a very scary day. The story really took a dark turn quickly. I thought that the person was just going to slide down and turned into death and loss. Sorry, terrible. I was pretty young when camping with my dad in Alabama. It's late at night, the embers of the fire are dying down. We're about to go to sleep when we hear what I can only describe as a bone-chilling moan in the woods. We looked at each other and decided it was trees rubbing together. But then it happened 2 more times. My dad grabbed the flashlight and I walked behind him with a big stick, determined I would save him if something went wrong. Eventually, we discover a woman lying on the ground not far from our campsite. She was on a hill, with her head facing down, feet uphill, continuing to moan. Turns out she had so much to drink that she could hardly walk, but she was also camping out in these woods with her boyfriend. They had a big fight, and he drove away, leaving her alone in the forest. She had seen our fire dying and wanted to give us the rest of her firewood before she left too, but had tripped and was too drunk to get up. We got her back to her campsite and made sure she wasn't driving anywhere that night. I'll never forget that moaning sound though. Camping in the Serengeti with Maasai tribemen as guards, sitting around the fire when suddenly the Maasai looks out into the pitch blackness, turns the flashlight on, illuminating the eyes of a lion 40 yards out, just staring at us. I never heard a thing. Thought our tent was being attacked by 3 bears. Turns out someone's dog just got loose and the light outside made them look gigantic. Used to camp at this fairly secluded spot on state land. It has since been discovered and become popular, unfortunately. I've been going to that site since I was a kid, and it had become an annual tradition for my buddies and I to kinda unplug and rough it for a few days. However, at the time, a little over 15 years ago now, it was relatively unknown, and it was a bit of a trek to get to the campsite. Middle of the woods, but close to a lake, perfect for swimming. We're talking no cell signal, no light pollution. You're just out in the wilderness. My buddies and I were geeked to get out there and spend the weekend camping every summer. One summer afternoon, I'm the first to arrive, ready for a week of camping, drinking, and swimming. However, To my dismay, I discovered that the site already has an established campsite going. There's a couple tents set up. Granted, it's a fairly large campsite, so I decided to haul my gear over and see if I can talk to the other campers into letting us share the spot. Who knows? They might be cool and maybe it'll be one big party. I come up to the site and there's no people. The tents are empty. There was evidence of a campfire, so I know there were people here not too long ago. I decide to check the lake. Maybe they went swimming. There's a steep path that leads from the site to the lake, and as I'm walking alongside it, I discover some debris that is blown down along the path. There's a sleeping bag, some tools, and some clothes that had been on a line, but now they're all in the dirt. All evidence that this site has actually been set up for a while. The clothes are wet with ditch water. They have been sitting on the ground in the path for some time. There's no people at the lake, and I return to the site upon further investigation. I discover that this site has been abandoned for some time. But that doesn't explain why they just left everything behind. From what I could tell, the people camping here had left in a big effing hurry. There's clothes, there's food and other gear. I mean, it's an entire camp. The tents were fairly new. I mean, it's not just stuff that you leave behind unless you're scrambling and only grabbing the essentials. What was weird to me was that the fire was out, but there was still ice in their coolers and beers. So it couldn't have been too long ago that they were there. My other buddies arrive and we decide to set up camp nearby and keep an eye out. Maybe the people had to leave for an emergency or something. We wind up camping out the whole week and no evidence of people coming back to retrieve their stuff. Luckily, the DNR happened to stop by on patrol and we filled them in on our discovery. They'd let us know that they'd be packing up the stuff and take it into a lost and found up at their station. Kinda creepy, mostly weird. Who knows what happened to those people? When my current wife started dating, we went out camping in the fall. Leaves were down, kinda chilly, very romantic. In the middle of the night, we heard what we assumed was a two-legged creature near our car. Being the man I was, I got the boots on and was headed out. Wife, girlfriend, hands me this shitty little pocket knife. As soon as I undo the zipper, I hear the footsteps running away. I'm all manly, so I go check anyway. Upon returning to the tent, I'm faced with a .380 handgun pointed at me. That was pretty scary. She sent me into the forest with a pocket knife. Didn't want me to know she had a gun, so it wasn't weird. Nothing like walking back into what you feel is safety and having a gun pointed at your face. Well, at least she had it. Sheer terror when I was a kid at Boy Scout summer camp. One kid left a couple airheads out on the picnic table. Everyone woke up in the middle of the night to, no joke, 30 plus raccoons fighting over airheads and going into tents looking for more food. If you've never heard that many hissing and growling raccoons at the same time, good for you. Pretty sure two guys were going to rape my friend and me. We were teenagers, 16 and 18, and went up alone. We made dinner and were having a good time in the evening when some guy passed by our site in the river. He had a fishing pole, so we were like, whatever. He asked to go through our site to the road and we figured it was harmless enough and said yeah. He stopped and looked around our site and started asking us questions. How old are you? Where are you from? How long are you staying? Typical questions that were none of his business, but we were naive enough to answer. He eventually leaves and heads down the canyon on the road. A couple hours later, he shows back up with a buddy. Both of these guys are middle-aged, probably mid-40s. They start asking more questions. The original guy walks around and snoops about our campsite. We got an uneasy feeling and were super grateful when they eventually left, but they went up the canyon rather than back where they came from. Another couple hours pass and it's dark. My friend mentions how she can't hear anything because of the river, and it had her a bit antsy. We talked and it turned out we had both been on edge since the guys left. We had never seen them go back down the canyon. We both had a gut feeling that we needed to leave and fast. Maybe nothing would have happened, but we both felt it. The guys asked all the right questions to know that we would be there alone and defenseless that night. Oh, you've come to the right place. About 20 years ago, in the Pisgah National Forest, I was camping in a hammock for the first time. I didn't have a rain tarp yet, leaving myself completely uncovered save for a sleeping bag. Now, this was a trip from a summer camp in the area, so there were about 6 other teens with me. One kid decided, hey, chocolate, that's not a smellable, right? And left the chocolate in his pack, right next to mine, under the hammock. You may see where this is going. Lo and behold, around 12 o'clock, a juvenile black bear moseys his way into our campsite looking for that sweet, sweet chocolate. As he was messing with the packs underneath the hammock, his back kept bumping into me. I was starting to wake up, but I was very groggy. I kinda thought it was the kid looking for something in his pack. The bear realizes that the hammock is moving and gives it a bat with his paw like a cat with yarn, swinging me. At this point, I realized this is not a camper and start screaming. The rest of the campsite woke up and we threw rocks at the bear until it ran away. The kid got a severe punishment. Late at night, camping in the desert, heard footsteps all around our tents. Thought it was maybe some drunk guy from one of the nearby camps who was riding dirt bikes and stuff all day. Couldn't see anyone, couldn't see any shadows, kept hearing the footsteps literally inches from our tent. Woke up my friend silently and made him listen too. We were freaking out. Finally, they went away. So I slowly opened my tent zipper to look around and see who or what it was. Threw out a glow stick and saw some eyes flash in the darkness. Turns out it was two white desert foxes whose footsteps were somehow extremely heavy sounding. When I saw them, they were in our campsite eating all of our chocolate. Oops. Once in the wilderness, me and a couple of other guys, drunk as we were, started howling at the moon only to be inadvertently attract real wolves. They showed up at our campsite about 1.5 hours later when we were in our hammocks getting ready to sleep. No harm done. They sniffed around for a couple of minutes and then went off. Guess they were disappointed in what they found, and luckily not desperately hungry. Anyways, I was very scared and tried to remain completely still and silent during this brief encounter. Solo camping in the middle of nowhere. When I woke up in the morning, someone had made a cup of tea and partially drunk it in the middle of the night. No sign of anyone anywhere. When I was a kid, probably around 11 to 13, my best friend's grandparents lived on a farm, maybe 100 acres of forest with a few clearings and a house. That we used to camp out all the time. One night, a few of us were camping and we heard repeated thumps and screaming coming from the trees. We had literally just finished reading a book about Bigfoot in school and were positive that Bigfoot was out in the woods hitting trees and roaring. We got out of the tent, terrified, and walked through the woods toward the noise. Note, I guess people really do this kind of dumb thing. It's just not in horror movies. We eventually came to a clearing and found several of my friend's uncles trying to fix an old barn. While they were absolutely shit-faced, at like 2 o'clock in the morning. The thumps were the sound of them hitting wood with hammers. The screams were when they missed and hit themselves because of the alcohol. We were terrified, but now it's hilarious. Now that is some late night drunken antics, but also productive, so can't get mad about that. Cool. I was about 8. I didn't want to sleep in the tent with my sister, so I slept on a cot under the stars. Woke up to a bear sniffing my head and neck. I was basically paralyzed with fear. The bear left me and went to sniff around for snacks. It made enough noise to wake my parents, who then scared it away. I moved my cot into my sister's tent immediately after. I went on a road trip with some friends to Lake Chelan. We left late and got this was before cell phones. We didn't have a map and trusted my friend's memory. So we pull off the road and decided to camp for the night at a grassy area. We have limited lights and quickly make our tent. We were woken up in the morning by someone hitting the tent and screaming to get off his property. We'd inadvertently camped on some poor guy's lawn. We were just dumb 18-year-old kids, but have never packed up camp that quickly before. I was tent camping in Arkansas around 2003 to 04, and the Blair Witch Project was still fresh on my mind. I was about 20 years old at the time. Around 2 to 3 in the morning, we're woken up by what sounds like a small child running around our tent, crying and trying to get in. I was thoroughly freaked out. Finally decided to open the tent, and there was a kid that couldn't have been more than 3 years old, scared half to death and only wearing a diaper. I had lots of thoughts going through my mind, but mostly, how the hell do I handle this? I can't really go campsite to campsite, the ranger office is closed, and I'm standing there in the middle of the night holding a child that isn't mine. We decided to call the cops, figuring it was the safest thing to do. Just then a lady walks down the trail and is like, "How did you get out?" The kid was saying, "Mama, Mama," and went straight to her. She nonchalantly said thank you and walked away. Now as a parent, I can't imagine how much more that would freak me out if that were my kid. Not really camping, but my first time out in the field at Fort Stewart, Georgia, we had a small herd of about 10 wild boars go tearing through our bivouac area. I didn't really realize how dangerous they were until I saw everyone hauling ass to their vehicles. I hadn't been assigned a vehicle yet, so I just monkeyed up a tree and waited while they tore into our rations, wrecked our tent, and then effed off. Took them about an hour to destroy thousands of dollars worth of equipment. I was hunting in the Yukon and woke up at night to a bright sky and a loud roaring noise, crawled out of the tent and watched a meteor hit the mountain right across from us. This could have been our campsite. This was 25, 30 years ago. All our friends had was a map with a red circle. If we didn't come back in a month or so, we would be somewhere in that circle. I was on a camping trip with the scouts, and me and my friends were putting in the same tent as the weird kid. He was acting up all the time, getting into fights, and showing off how many knives he had. Anyway, one night we're in our tent playing blackjack, and I guess I said something that pissed him off because he started yelling at me. Well, that let the scout leaders know we were still up, so they told us to get to bed. I don't know how long I was asleep, but I woke up to him choking me. I thrashed about and tried to get him off of me, but I couldn't focus and was panicking. I remember the tent seemed to be getting darker and how heavy my eyelids were getting. My chest and head were hurting and aching, trying to get me to breathe, but it just felt so tired. I was starting to fade away, thinking my last thing I would hear was his laughter when, wham! My friend had woken up because of me struggling and him laughing and got up and started clobbering the dude. I was part coughing and part breathing once he got off of me. My friend screamed for help, and that got the adults' attention. He was yelled at for what he did, and they shuffled around people so that he would be sleeping in a tent alone right near the adults' tent. I got into a tent with my older brother, and I must have woken up 3 times that night kicking and screaming from nightmares of him killing me. When we all got back from the camp, his parents were told what happened, and that he was banned from scouts. They also told my mom, and it must have taken the active will of God for her not to go back and kick him. He got banned from a bunch of other activities that we both did, so I didn't really ever see him again. I still wake up scared from nightmares of being choked or suffocated, and while I'm a pretty sound sleeper, if anyone tries to walk or get close to me while I'm asleep, I shoot up awake and panic. I can't even really nap with my dogs cause of it. I don't know if I'll ever be able to sleep soundly around anyone ever again. Of all the threatening, menacing animals and apex predators out there in the wild, a lot of times the scariest stuff are just humans. First time camping was with wife and dog in a tent, and the upper half was mesh and see-through. Woke up around sunrise to my dog growling at something. I leaned forward to check. There's a bear cub walking through our campsite. The scary part was that I didn't want my dog growling to attract the mother of the cub to defend it, so I pinned my dog on the bed and held its mouth to get him to be quiet till the bear left. Heart was beating out of my chest. Later I found out it was an orphan bear, and it was friendly to humans and survived by stealing food from garbage or campsites. I was on a trip with the YMCA Camp Widgie, and on our last day on a trail, we got up early to hike the last few miles to where the van was to pick us up. We rounded a turn on the trail and could see the van and a weird swirling dark cloud on the trail ahead. Then the guy in front screamed, and all of us were attacked by this big black wasp. I accidentally got on my hands and it was the size of a cicada. I only got 2 stings, but the 2 guys in front got closer to 10. We hauled ass back up trail away from the van, and our counselor immediately started handing out EpiPens, but none of us turned out to be allergic. We hiked the long way around the wasps to the van, but man, I was shaking the whole time. I was an Air Force cadet for most of my youth, from 13. When I was about 16, I was a cadet sergeant and was put in control of about 10 guys, lower ranks than me, on a navigation exercise. This was quite a while ago, before OHS really came about. We used to do wild stuff, and it was great. But I was the only female in this particular time, and when I led the guys to our checkpoint, we were instructed to camp for the night and continue to the next checkpoint in the morning. So we made camp, a fire, and just hung out eating our rations. There was this weird guy, maybe 14, but physically massive, who always rubbed me up the wrong way. It was really dark and quiet, and he just goes, "Hey, I have a good idea. Let's rape Sergeant Cameron." My blood went cold, and I looked over at my other cadets. They all laughed it off, shut the dude down. One said, "What? She's just a cool guy with long hair." They tried to make it casual, but I knew they were actually aware and trying to protect me. Before this, he had bragged about knowing how to break a person's neck and wanting to kill animals. I didn't sleep that night, just sat up by the fire and reported him when we got back to the base the next day. If I didn't have good mates with me that night who respected me, I don't know what would have happened. Hiking a trail in East Tennessee, hadn't seen a soul since leaving the parking lot that morning. Make camp up on top of a rock bluff 50 yards off the trail as the sun sets. Quick dinner, then probably asleep by 7. Around 11 I wake up hearing voices, which sound like muttered German. I listen for a few minutes and I can hear footsteps and the voices coming toward the tent. I wake up my hiking partner, who hears the same thing I'm hearing. The footsteps stop, what seems like 10 feet from the tent, and the same 2 mumbling voices. I unzip the tent and look out, and there's nothing. Get my flashlight, shine around, nothing. After a few minutes, I get back in the tent. We both try to sleep, and after a few minutes, the voices start up again, and what sounds like someone cutting a tree with an axe. My partner pulls on his boots. We both agree the sound is 10 feet away to the right of the tent. He unzips the tent slowly. We're still hearing sounds. He jumps outside with his flashlight, heads in that direction, nothing. We sit outside the tent for over an hour because there's no way we're going to sleep, but we hear nothing. Eventually, we're both about to pass out, so we go back in the tent and fall asleep. Around 3:30, the axe sound starts again. We both just lie there listening for a few minutes. We hear the cracking and whooshing sound of a falling tree, heard and felt the thud as it hit the ground. We both jumped up and scrambled out of the tent, and there was nothing. No sound at all. No wind whistling through the trees, no bugs, no frogs, just silence. We packed up everything in minutes, but decided not to leave because the climb back down to the trail was difficult in daylight and too risky in the dark. We sit there until the sun comes up without hearing the voices or axe again. We'd calmed down somewhat by that point and started searching the area. We probably went 100 yards in every direction from our camp, and there was no sign anyone had been there, and certainly no large, recently fallen tree. Last summer I was camping in the San Juans in the southwest Colorado. We go almost every year, but the weather last year was like I'd never seen before. It's always monsoon season when we go camping, but this time it started raining and just didn't stop. For 5 days we camped in constant rain with landslides coming down all around us. Every day we were completely blocked from leaving camp in some new, different direction, with the route to the closest town blocked, making it several hours away. A bad avalanche winter cleared swaths of trees, and wildfires had cleared out of normal camping areas and even more trees, which left nothing but bare ground to be washed away by the rains. Our last day of camping, as we were packing up, we hear the increasingly familiar sound of a landslide starting, followed by the most terrifying, blood-curdling scream I've ever heard in my life. I have no doubt I heard someone die that morning from across the valley, so we hauled ass down the mountain and found someone with an ATV and radio to try and get help. We headed out towards home east on I-70 afterwards and ended up missing the Glenwood Canyon landslide by about 45 minutes, which was so powerful it changed the course of the Colorado River and completely washed away the highway. Mother Nature taught me a lot about respecting her power that trip. And possibly the only thing that could be scarier than humans is the power of nature and witnessing it with your own eyes. In college, I did a lot of solo car camping from the back of my truck I owned at the time. I went to a remote public area in the Ozarks and planned to stay overnight. After setting up all my bedding and having dinner and a sugary dessert, I decided to hunker down for the night. Well, about 45 minutes after turning off the light, I started hearing leaves crunching in the woods about 30 yards away. Not really concerned, I write it off as a possum, deer, coyote, etc., just moving through the area. However, my imagination started going wild, as it always does, and I started thinking of the worst situations. More leaves crunching, but closer. Definitely in the campsite. I usually carry a can of bear spray, but being a dumb kid, I didn't think about the fact that I was in an enclosed space until I was ready to use it. More crunching leaves, but further away. I start to relax a little, and eventually they disappear. Nerves completely racked, I try to go to sleep. I think at some point I get into a really light sleep and wake up about 2 to 3 hours later. It's about 2 in the morning, and there is very obviously something walking between me in the campfire. At this point, a deep, loud, and incredibly scary voice from inside my truck camper asks, "Do you believe in God?" I effing start screaming and turn on headlamps, thrashing, and get ready to defend for my life. The footsteps run away and disappear into the woods as I'm in full panic mode. I have to tell myself I hallucinated the whole thing because of the sugary dessert I ate before bed. Still gets my heart racing when I think about it too much to this day. I was a kid and on a family camping trip. The rest of the family slept in the trailer and I slept in the Mexican hammock. In the middle of the night, something was forcefully pushing the hammock around and it didn't feel human. It was terrifying. It turned out to be a deer rubbing its antlers on the hammock. We can laugh about it now. Camping out in the desert with 4 friends, 3 females and my older buddy, who's a bit weird but cool. We're all on drugs. It's one of the girls' birthdays, and while they're all sleeping in a camper, we're sleeping in our individual tents. It starts to rain pretty heavy. Night falls, and everyone returns to their designated spaces. The girls are loud, but still I'm starting to fall asleep when I hear one of them call my name directly. I wake up. They're now yelling at me to come to the camper. Well, alright. Get dressed, unzip the tent, slosh through some mud, knock on the camper door, they let me inside. They all look pale-faced and shook. I ask them what's wrong, and they tell me that something is outside of the camper. They could not warn me of this before, apparently. I look around, and the party state of the van rolled my eyes and told them there was nothing out there, but they insisted and made me wait with them until they heard another sound. I remind them they're on drugs, and it was probably just auditory hallucinations, but they swear it isn't, and I finally relent and sit down and wait. Minutes pass, nothing but the pitter-patter of raindrops, and then suddenly a scratching sound. It sounded just outside the camper. I tell them it's probably a tree branch, but they say it's something else, and to go look. I grab a flashlight and head out into the rain to do a circle of the camper. Nothing there. No footprints in the mud, no tree branches anywhere close by either. Weird, but nothing there, so I go back and tell them the coast is clear. They're shook and still unsure, so I offer to just sleep there on the floor for a bit. I'm starting to doze off again when I hear a voice whisper, "Psst, can you hear me?" "Yes," I say, and start to wake up. "What's up?" And the girls are all silent. One of them finally stirs and says, "You heard that too? It wasn't me." I sit up and look around. The other 2 girls are asleep. We're staring at each other's eyes when suddenly, we both clear as day, hear a child laughing in the other corner of the van. "What the F was that?" I exclaim. And the girl who's awake says that she's heard the laughing before, and that's what scares her. So we wake up the other 2 to see if they were messing with us. They weren't. They were annoyed. So now I'm thinking maybe it's someone's phone? We find all the phones and out them together, as well as other electronic devices. Suddenly there's a loud creaking sound just outside the front door. Christ. I yell out thinking maybe it was my guy friend. No response. I grab a broom and slowly open the door and peer outside, but there's no light and I can't see shit. I close the door and am freaking out. Now I'm wondering if some local townies at other campers were effing with us. More scratching on the side of the camper. Suddenly, I remember my friend is all alone, so I start to yell at him to wake up and to bring his guns over. He didn't have any guns, because I think there might be people effing with us. After yelling for him loudly for 10 minutes, he finally wakes up and yells back that he'll be right over. He gets there, and immediately I feel more secure. 2 grown-ass men, we can handle this. I catch him up to speed, and he just mocks us and reminds us we're on drugs and imagining it. But I swear it's something real. And he agrees to stay in the camper on the floor with me, ready to charge into the night if need be. We go quiet. We wait 5 minutes, 10, 15, falling asleep, and then the giggles. The goddamn child laughter returns from just outside the van. My friend thinks it's one of the girls messing with us and tells us to just go to sleep. They swear it's not them, but he doesn't believe them and just lays back down. Not 10 seconds later, there's a loud creak sound again and scratching, and it sounds like someone is just outside. He sits up alert, looks at our horrified faces, and with all the same expression, "We told you so," and he rushes out of the camper into the darkness and rain as we hear him fly around the van yelling. But he comes back and reports no one was there. We start to talk about the campground being haunted, old burial ground maybe? We don't know. At this point, we're jabbering on just to hear our own voices. We all agree to just stay awake until the morning. The sun rises, the rain dries up, we pack up and leave. I'm getting gas at a local town when suddenly the thought hits me. I googled, "Psst, can you hear me?" And this is when I discover the Eviltron. Yeah, friends, a small, sadistic, sinister electronic device that emits creepy sounds and can be attached to any metal surface. It was my weird friend. He hid it underneath the girl's whippet canister. In fact, it wasn't theirs. It was his canister, and they'd lifted it from the tent while he slept. But he knew what they'd try, and he tricked them, like a Trojan horse, into bringing the device into their camper. I was collateral damage, and he just went with it, silently chuckling to himself, the mastermind, the goddamn mastermind. The fallout was bad between him and the girls, lol, but I thought it was the best prank I'd ever seen pulled off, to this day. Bravo. Man, this feels pretty mundane, but the most scared I've ever been was camping at a horse riding show or competition thing. The venue wasn't in the wilderness at all, just a big park area, and we were basically camped out in practically a grass parking lot. Somewhere in the middle of the night, I was woken up by something kind of nudging my head. It didn't take long to figure out that a few of the horses must have gotten loose and were just grazing around the base of our tent. Now, the thing is, horses are effing big, and this dude was walking around in the dark right next to my head. It felt entirely feasible that the horse might accidentally just step on the edge of the tent, which is where our heads were. I considered making noise or swatting at the horse's nose to try and get him to move away, but spooking this giant horse standing right above us also seemed like a bad idea. In the end, I ended up just sitting up the tent until he moved along. It was all good, but it felt like we were just one casual horse step away from brain damage. Mine has nothing to do with danger or the paranormal, but with culture shock. I'm from a place where there are 0 raccoons. I'd only ever seen them in a zoo or on TV. Went to America for the first time, where we camped near Yosemite Park. Was absolutely scared shitless to see this huge, fat, meter-long rodent crawl outside of a sewage pipe while going for a pee at night. Just took a few seconds for my brain to figure out what it was looking at in order to be able to laugh about the situation, but man, I nearly fainted. I wasn't as scared as I should have been, but my fear gene is broken, and I had been drinking, so we have a lake less than an hour from home, and my daughter's friends had never been camping, so we decided to do a quick overnight there. We, mom and daughter, 18 then, camp a lot, and like the solitude, so we often try to find the most remote places. No campsite or anything, just drive up and find a space. So we found this nice little peninsula big enough for about 3 campsites, and it being Sunday, we were hoping the other 2 groups would leave. They did eventually, and we had the place very much to ourselves. As the night goes on, we have a nice fire, sing, laugh, I'm drinking wine, we're making s'mores, everything is perfect, until we go to sleep. About an hour in, the girls are bugging me to wake up because it's raining, and we need to put the cover on the tent. Huge tent, so all hands needed. By now the wind is blowing and we're struggling, but we finally get it covered, and it's back to sleep we go, until a motorcycle, more specifically a dirt bike, at about 2 a.m., just riding circles around the peninsula. Mind you, this is literally a small enough area that only 3 large tents plus 3 cars would fit, and there's nothing else nearby but bushes and the lake. There would be no reason to be there, as it was obviously we were alone. Up, down, around, he rides, then stops. Almost an hour this goes on. Up, down, around and stop, around and stop, never cutting the engine. I just want to sleep, so I go to the front of the tent and unzip. I look outside and see him just staring. So I climb out of the tent and stare back. It's dark, and I can't tell this creep can even see me. So I go back in the tent, frustrated. The girls ask what he's doing, and when I tell them, they get really frightened. I tell them I'm gonna go give him a piece of my mind. They're terrified, demand I don't leave the tent, so I settle back in and wait. Up, around, circle, engine rev, idle, over and over. This goes on for at least another hour. I've had it. Down, up, around, all with the annoying blasting motocross sound blasting by our tent back and forth and stop. I look out. He's staring again. I'm about to go stomping over to go tell him off when I start to get the tingles all down my spine. He was facing directly towards our tent, saying nothing, just still and staring. I realize I have no weapons, no way to protect the girls, and he's between us and the car. I wait. I'm outside the tent, but I haven't made a move forward because now instinct and logic have the better of me, and I realize that an aggressive approach is probably the wrong move. I stay stock still and look at the rider for what felt like an eternity, both of us staring. Must have been 20 minutes I stood there, and then just like that, he took off, drove up the peninsula and out of earshot and never came back. To this day, I'll never know what that was about or if I did the right thing. I can only say I'm glad I never confronted him. My gut just told me no. As for my daughter and I think I need to buy a gun if we're gonna camp alone like this. Me and my partner misjudged how far we could get in a canoe before dark. We did a few portages and ended up in a big lake with seemingly all the campsites taken, so we just kept going, trying to find an empty site. We got to a section of the lake that had almost no campsites. We knew there were more up ahead, so we kept going. When the sun set, it got very cold and very dark very fast. We had to slowly canoe along the edges of the lake, pointing our flashlights at the trees. The trees were so dense and the rocks so steep that if it's not a campsite, then there's no way you could climb ashore. Even with the flashlights and being up close, you could barely make out the trees through the mist hanging on the water. Occasionally, we'd see the reflection of eyes in the trees, probably a raccoon or something, but still terrifying. It took hours. We knew that if we had hit a log and capsized, it was so cold that we could risk getting hypothermia. Eventually, we found a campsite and set up our tent in the dark. We were exhausted, but so happy to finally be safe. The next few days, we stayed on that site and ended up having a great time. But for a while there, it was pretty terrifying. Camping near a river. I don't think anyone knew I was there. I heard a bunch of trucks pull up, a bunch of people get out, a bunch of guys and one girl. They were threatening her. Even though I remember a lot of details, I don't think I can type up any more of this. I think she was being trafficked. I didn't have cell service, and I didn't have a weapon. I just stayed quiet until they all left. I will say, it was just talking. Nothing physical happened. I reported it at the National Park Ranger the next day as I hiked out, but there wasn't much I could do. I feel sick writing this, 8 years later. I hate myself for not doing anything. I can't camp anymore. This is harder to write than I expected. It was terrifying. I was once solo camping for the first time in Harz, Germany. It was my first time going alone, and I was very new to this. When I arrived in Wernigerode, I started walking the path on my map, but didn't exist, so I went back. It was already dark when I returned to the village, so I decided to sleep in the hills close to the village. After I set up camp, I wanted to sleep, but I heard noises. It almost sounded like a baby crying and screaming in short bursts. I really got paranoid over a 15-minute time, slowly hearing the sound coming closer. After a while, the sound was so close that I decided to say, F this, put on my clothes, went out to the tent, and dragged it to the road. I packed everything and went into the village again and slept in the local park. Unfortunately, there were no places hidden from the path, so I chose to sleep as far away from the path in only my green sleeping bag. Next day, I woke up early and got back. So now, with more experience, it was probably some bird, and my paranoia made it worse than it was. Late one summer, early fall, my husband and I went camping at the beach with his daughter and her fiance. We had a fun, chill time, snacking and watching the sunset, then got in our tents to sleep after dark. I had this awful, uneasy feeling that I just couldn't shake, but I didn't want to be a party pooper, Finally, I said something to my husband, who felt the same way but also didn't want to ruin the trip. After a moment of discussing what to do, he decided to tell the kids we weren't really digging it and wanted to go home. In an instant, he was back at our tent. The kids felt the same way. We started packing up immediately as fast as we could. Few words exchanged, but all laser focused on the same task, getting the F out of there. My stepdaughter and I waited in my car while the guys packed in the last of the gear. As they approached us, a huge lifted white truck came out of the darkness and plowed through the area we were just settled in not 10 minutes ago. It would have absolutely crushed us. It was a freaky experience for all of us that could have ended so much worse, especially since she had gotten pregnant with her first baby at the time. We were so thankful to all still be here together. We haven't gone beach camping ever since. I don't know what force compelled us to leave that night, but it is worth mentioning that my father's ashes were spread at this beach years prior. It was his favorite place. A couple of months ago, we were camping in our trailer with our 8-month-old and 2 dogs. Main bed is in the rear and dogs pack and play kept in the front of the trailer, divided by a curtain and sound machine. About 3 a.m. our dogs were barking super loud, so I got up to calm them down, thinking they already woke up our baby. I go to the front of the trailer, and the dogs are gone, and the door is wide open. In a sleepy daze, I peek out of the trailer, and my heart instantly dropped. Our baby was taken, so I thought. I immediately reached down, and he was sound asleep in his pack and play. Thank God. I whistled for the dogs, and they came running back around the corner. My only explanation is that someone opened the door and was greeted by the dogs and took off. Went camping with my girlfriend about 4-ish years ago in the mountains, just east of where we live. We're both a little hippie, so we brought some toys, juggling bags, Diablo, poi, etc., and thought it might be fun to bring out our recently acquired brass singing bowls. We have 3 different sizes that produce different tones, with the middle-sized green bowl being our favorite in both appearance and tone. If you've ever played a singing bowl before, you know they don't just make the tone by themselves, and it can take a little effort to get the tone out cleanly and clearly. In my opinion, that's kind of the fun of the bowls, is coaxing the sound out of it. It adds a little bit of necessary skill, and makes the singing bowls an instrument with a little exclusivity. The second night out there, after bedding down for the night, I was up suddenly to hear the green bowl unmistakably singing. My girlfriend was in the tent with me, so it definitely wasn't her. Again, they don't sing by themselves. They have to be played, so of course, the both of us were rightly surprised, perplexed, and admittedly freaked out by the fact that this bowl was singing, seemingly of its own accord. She nudged me to see if I was experiencing the same thing she was, looked at me, wide-eyed, and said, "Are you hearing this too?" I nodded for fear that my speech would cause the bowl to stop. After staring at each other for what felt like an eternity, realistically it was about 3 or 4 minutes, we quietly resolved to make our way over to the zipper flap of the tent and open it just enough to see what was playing our bowl. However, as soon as we started to move, the bowl stopped. And not just like someone stopped playing it and walked away. No, it stopped. The bowl muted. No resonating tone whatsoever. It was like someone had grabbed the edge of the bowl, like you would a cymbal on a drum kit, and silenced it instantly. After the muting, we rushed ourselves out of the tent in the hopes that maybe we could catch sight or sound of whatever it was that decided to stop by and play with our singing bowl. But alas, nothing was there. No footprints, no trail, no indication that anything at all had been anywhere near the bowl. We still cannot explain what happened that night, and it's one of those stories that even now sends a bit of shiver down my spine and makes my hair stand a little on end. Whatever played our bowl that night didn't feel hostile or angry, maybe curious and playful, but it definitely didn't want us to know what it was. I used to camp a good amount. I was with my girlfriend, and we camped out about 7 miles into a 15-mile hike. We weren't the only ones out there. A group of guys were also there at the campsite. Bunch of bros. Pretty much immediately started hitting on us, even after I told them we're lesbians. It started getting a little late. They kept inviting us out to the campfire. We just wanted to sleep. I felt really uncomfortable, and so did my girlfriend. So I went over to one of their tents to talk and heard them talking. They were talking about how they were going to rape us. we got the F out of there. The fear in that moment will probably be unmatched. Nothing like the thought of losing your child. And then the relief. But scary, glad it worked out. I was going to camp in a big forest that I live close by. It's a very dense rainforest, like a mini Amazon, until we arrived at a part where there were very steep passages, and we had to walk on slippery rocks until I slipped on one of them and almost fell into a ravine that I couldn't even see the ground because of so many trees. If I had fallen there, I wouldn't be able to be writing this. About 12 years ago, while on a 10-day hunting trip in northern Michigan, we were at a place called Deadstream Swamp. We used to tent it back in these days, and it was about the third week in November, so it was cold and about 6 to 10 inches of snow on the ground. It was time to call it a night. We got in our mummy bags on our cots and had a small battery-operated radio we would listen to while falling asleep. The Michigan backwoods get dark as F. I mean, pitch effing black and eerie. I passed right out this night, but got woke up sometime later by my hunting buddy Dave saying my name repeatedly. I was sleeping, so I literally remember thinking it was the radio playing. Then I took notice to my man and Dave sounding terrified. I said, "What?" Dave says, "Dude, get your effing gun, get your effing gun." I'm all disoriented, but remember saying, "Why? What's wrong?" He said, "Dude, someone's here. Someone's effing here." Now let me add, we were backwoods campers. We didn't stay at state parks or campgrounds, and we were a good 40 minutes drive back into the thick Michigan Huron National Forest from any roads or civilization. We had set up our camp at the end of a very long dead-end 2-track. We had been there 5 or 6 days at this point and never saw not one other person or even a sign of someone else being out there. So I'm all like, what the F? And in my disbelief, haze and mumbled something like, "What the F do you mean someone's here? What did you order, an effing pizza?" Dave says, "Dude, listen." Finally, I came to enough to realize the radio was off, but I could hear AC/DC blaring through the forest and a faint sound of an old pickup truck blazing up the 2-track toward our camp. It has a big 19-inch tent with a huge rubber tarp draped over it, so it was hard to tell there was a tent there if you didn't know there was. At this time, I realized this is wrong, and no one should be driving up to our camp in the middle of the night, so I'm reaching for my gun. Now, the headlights were moving across the tent, while the truck made its way through the winding 2-track and was within 100 yards of our tent. I finally heard yelling over this AC/DC, which sounded like an old, drunk hillbilly screaming with a scratchy-like voice, saying something about, "Hey, you effing neighbors, get your asses out here." At this point, he literally had his truck about a foot away from the door of my tent and was revving his engine. It blew my mind this guy found us or even knew we were there. This was super odd. In all my fear, I racked a shell into my Winchester 20 gauge and screamed, "You better get the mother F out of here. I'm not playing around." The engine revved up louder, and his truck inched closer to the tent. I thought for sure he was going to run us over. I yelled as loud as I could, "Mother effer, I'm not playing. I'm about to start shooting." He must have got the message, because he backed his truck up and left, but very, very slowly. The rest of the trip had a very odd feeling, and we never figured out who he was or where he came from. Way out by the dirt road where we turned off to get back there were 2 or 3 old mobile foam trailers that reminded me of the movie Hills Have Eyes. Just very dirty. Lots of odd things hanging on the porches and junk everywhere in the front yards like old fridges and junk cars and trash. I'm assuming the guy lived in one, but we never found out. Still gives me the creeps thinking about it. I thought I was going to have to shoot him in fear of our lives. It was frightening, to say the least. Got woken up at 4 a.m. in a windstorm, left the tent and got into the car for safety, and a tree fell on top of us, caving in the roof and blowing out the back windows. Thankfully, my 4-year-old was just fine. Didn't have comprehensive, though, so I didn't get a dime from insurance, and my SUV was written off. When I was young, my family and I were camping in the White Mountains of New Hampshire. There was a bad storm that rolled in unexpectedly, and in the middle of the night there was a loud cracking sound and a boom. A tree had fallen and landed on a woman sleeping in her tent, not that far from our site. Needless to say, she was killed. I remember being scared of the woods for a time, especially during storms. I'm Native American, based out of Oregon. Back in around 2006, I went on a youth camping trip with some of the tribal leaders over the course of spring break. I recall we were all sitting around the campfire winding down the night after dinner, and I absent-mindedly started whistling. One of the tribal leaders told me to knock it off, and then proceeded to tell me why. I learned that there really is a mythology to explain all kinds of things, but this one terrified me as a teen. It's the story about why we sleep at night. Natives are spiritual people. The night times belong to the spirits. We give them that time by going to sleep, but the spirits also have these creatures that defend their time. For example, imagine there's a 16-year-old absent-mindedly whistling in the middle of the night, disturbing the one time a day that you could just be you. This would make an angry spirit, and being that you're also a powerful spirit, you could use chaos, the likes of which the world has never seen. So, out of respect for the spirit and fear of what they may do to the world, creatures called stick people come out and take the 16-year-old away so that they're never seen or heard from again. Stick people are, according to the legend I was given, entities that will try to cause people to become lost and alone by luring them to places they have no business being, like out in the woods at night. I think about that story every time I whistle. Camping on LSD with some friends, a Winnebago pulled up with 3 guys who claim that one of them just walked out of the mental hospital against doctor's orders. The guy in question was probably 6'3", 300 pounds with a shaved head, exactly like the guy from Full Metal Jacket. They sat at our campfire until 2 in the morning talking our ears off, except for the scary guy. He never said an effing word. He just kept nodding his head and picking up at his skin. The other 2 guys kept asking us to come watch videos in their RV on a VCR, creepy Deliverance vibes for hours. We had to ask them to leave, and things got super awkward and scary. They drove off in the middle of the night after taking all of our firewood. I've run into grizzlies in campsites before, and this was much scarier. The bears just want food. These guys seem to want to rape and rob us, if not more. A buddy and I were on a camping trip in the Poudre Canyon outside Fort Collins, Colorado. It was late in the season, so all of the campgrounds were closed. We found a random spot off a random road. Both of us have a ton of experience and have camped all over Colorado and Utah, but something about this particular spot was just off. Almost immediately, we found a blanket wrapped around a deceased skeletal animal. We assumed it was just a pet that someone had thrown out, but it set the mood. We went hiking, climbed up a few hills, and came across an abandoned tent wrapped up in a tree. I was certain we were going to find a body in it, but it was just filled with notebooks and a sleeping bag. We start hiking down the hill and end up walking down the side, very steep. As we're traversing down, we're hit with the smell of death. Nestled into a tree on the side of a very steep hill is a small towel with something clearly inside of it. We leave it be and hike down. This is probably 200 to 300 feet up the side of a steep hill, with the towel in a tree facing the top of the hill, clearly intentionally put there. We down some bourbon, build up some courage and hike back up, grab a stick, open up the towel. Inside, a very recently deceased owl. Somehow, someway, someone had killed this owl, wrapped it in a towel, hiked up a steep hill off a random mountain road, and stuck it beside a tree. We started a fire, slammed the bourbon, and got the F out of there in the morning. Driving cross-country with my dog and planned to camp over in Yellowstone. However, when I arrived, every campground in the park was completely full. Drove the loop a couple times and kept asking, but the sun was going down, and there was still no vacancy anywhere. I found an out-of-the-way trailhead parking lot, hitched up some of my framework and hiked up the trail for a little bit, then off a few yards to the edge of a pasture, cleared a site, dug a small fire pit in the dirt, and pitched my 4-man. Ate a couple hot dogs with my dog, hung all the leftovers and trash in a nearby tree, buried the fire ash, and climbed into my sleeping bag. So far, not sure it gets better. Woke up to the sound of wolves howling in the distance. Hard to say how far, but a few miles. thought it was beautiful. Just started to drift asleep again, and the howling was now at the opposite edge of the pasture I was on, still maybe 3 to 4 miles. They moved quick, but still wasn't worried. Next time they howled, they were in the middle of the pasture and eventually were circling my tent. It is hard to say how many when it's a 4-legged animal, but howls and footfalls together I'd say 4 to 5. Both my dogs and I laid very silently, hoping they were just curious. After a very tense couple of minutes, they did begin to break away and finally move on. After I heard a howling from 3 to 4 of 3/4 of a mile in the other direction, we both relaxed and eventually fell back to sleep. The sky was still dark the next time I woke up, but I felt like I had slept for a few hours more. This time, however, whatever was circling my tent was much larger. The footfalls were audibly large, and the breathing could be heard. Although I never saw it, my guess is a bear. He seemed most interested in where I buried the fire. Perhaps some juices from the hot dogs did not fully burn off, but once done nosing around, turned his attention to my tent and circled it a few times. Unlike the wolves, I was slightly more concerned that a large bear would breach the tent if hungry, so I reached for my flashlight and turned it on. From the outside, I imagined the sudden appearance of a large glowing green dome was staring at the bear, immediately froze in place. It seemed to be enough to make it reevaluate whatever it was thinking as soon as it began moving away. Didn't sleep another wink, but the sky was now starting to lighten. After an hour of listening carefully, I stuck my head out of my tent and looked around. All clear. Light rain started to fall, so what would have been a hasty pack-out was even hastier. Collected everything and headed back to the truck. Managed to find a campground with a vacancy that morning. Insult to injury, after hanging my damp tent up to dry on site, a ranger came by and asked where I stayed the previous night, as they have a record of my entering the park but not checking into a camp. Lied and said I slept in my truck in a parking lot and got a ticket. The rest of my time, the park was fantastic, and ended up in Portland, Oregon, after another week of camping my way across, without any other incidents. I was supervising a church youth group at a privately owned camp in the Southwest. One afternoon, I was lounging in my anti-gravity chair when I caught a whiff of smoke. I checked the fire pit and everything seemed to be out. Then I look up in the grove of trees 30 feet away to see flames just starting to take off. I grabbed the fire bucket and doused the main flame, then proceeded to use the nearby hose to continue wetting the area down. If I had not been there, the 50-year-old property would have burned to the ground. We later found a small charred log in the little grove that had been smoldering. It was possible that one of the youth in our group had tossed it over there, but I doubt it. The host said someone else had been in that site the night before we arrived, so I'd like to think that they did and the log had just smoldered for days until the wind picked up. I just can't imagine one of the boys I was supervising being that stupid, but you never know. To this day, I still feel a tinge of fear thinking about what could have happened. Be safe with fire, kids. It had just stopped raining and dinner was on the go. We had to stoke the fire back up and quickly, so everyone went to work gathering wood from the forest, twigs, branches, kindling. The fire was going nicely, tall flames, now to keep adding to it so we could get those coals. To boil the water and cook the food, I was in a plastic poncho and turned to tidy the wood pile by the fire when there came a loud shout, "Look out!" I turned around, startled, and saw nothing out of the ordinary, then heard running footsteps from the side, and before I could turn to look, I got tackled. The poncho got ripped off, my back and over my head, and as I hit the ground, I caught a fleeting glimpse of a fireball sailing through the air, then landing on the pine needles in the ground ahead. The others ran to it and stomped it out, as the camper who tackled me stood and helped me to my feet. My back had been to the fire, and as I was bending over to tidy the woodpile, the bottom edge of the poncho had caught fire, and flame shot up my back. I didn't even feel it or know it, but my dad's friend, Ted, had just happened to glance up at the moment and saw my back go up in flames, and didn't hesitate, just ran and jumped and tore it off, split seconds before it would have melted into my back. Saved my life. Not spooky, but scary. Was camping over an Easter weekend at a state park with my wife and kids a few years ago. We were boiling crawfish and had the boat tied off to go check the jugs out in the river. This slightly older dude from the next campsite over just up and takes up residence in our campsite. Nice enough guy, cracking jokes, talking about his ex-wife and kids, endearing himself to my wife and kiddos, while I'm busting ass doing all the camp chores and cook prep without any of their help. Naturally, he's ingrained himself enough to be invited to eat. Yay. Then, after dinner, I just can't get rid of him. Kids went to their tents, wifey and I are having a couple of drinks to wind down. He's there drinking and turning on the charm with her. She's not interested, just trying to be nice. I'm like, what the F, this dude's deal? Well, he finally has had too much, and I got my oldest son to help me carry the guy to his tent. We get him there and he wakes up, looks at my son and says, "You're exactly what I need, like a fairy boy." We look at each other crazy and go to bed. The next day, the guy is back again and talks his way onto my boat with us to check the jugs. Admittedly, I'd rather have him with me than leave him there with them. Not sure if he was a threat or not, but he was definitely scary.